Holy Father, we thank you for today. We even rejoice in the cold. Lord, we rejoice that we can feel the cold, and we know that the breath that you have given us is still there. And we ask that you bless the time here together. We ask that you help us just grow our faith and our assurance in you, and therefore our fervor in sharing your good news with your people. We ask that you bless the rest of the day in our worship service as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So the came in today. It sounded like Larry was expecting to lead today, and then I was like, "Wait, I thought I was," and he's like, "I thought you were too." So the notes here, it sounds like June put together some notes for the chapter, which is great. I did not put these together, but it's a nice outline summary of the chapter. And then looking at it, I'm like, okay, good. I prepared the right chapter. I've been here for a little bit. This is one of the weeks that the parent group is off because President's Day weekend. It's a 3-day weekend. Actually, a fair amount of people are on, at least for the parent group, aren't even here. They're on some vacation some places. So I was like, well, I can come up and pitch in adult ed. So yeah. Seems like there's a few other people who had some travel plans. I guess there's a little bit of a thinner crowd than last time, but
well, we have a car of 3 ladies who snow, forget it.
Yeah, for sure. So, and so the topic chapter today was on archaeology, and how the archaeology contributes to our faith and what it can help us know and what it can't. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, this is one of those things that I actually don't know a ton about. And we could get into discussions about, okay, so-and-so said this, but then this person on this date and this geography did this dig and found this thing which said that, and that's real in the weeds. And I'm not sure we would remember any of that after it was done, even if we went over it. So maybe the first thing that I wanted to do to start the conversation off is start off with a discussion about, after having read this, what is it, and not just this chapter, but generally speaking, how does or what does archaeology contribute to our understanding of our faith? So for us, it's mostly secondhand. Or has anyone actually ever been on a dig? I have not. What? Has anyone been on an archaeological dig?
No.
Okay. So, and I think this is for the vast majority of people, that's what this is. This is secondhand. It's what?
Oh, okay. When we were in Israel, our leader was a retired tank commander who was very rough and really to the point.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd go to a site, and before we even started to do that, he said, I'm going to take you to places and look at the places 3 ways. One, it is true. The place that we're going to go to is absolutely true. It's been documented that Jesus was there.
Mm-hmm.
The other place is the second way to look at a place is that possibly Jesus was there, and this is a true place.
Mm-hmm.
The third way was just buy a souvenir. Just one. So, and these were archaeological digs.
Mm-hmm.
And some were obvious. You get to one that's the toilets. I mean, yeah, that's the toilets.
Yep.
Right. Declare it a sentence, states a fact.
Yep.
So continue.
Oh no, well, it's a nice. Jesus was there. Possibly Jesus was there. Just buy a souvenir. I mean, that is how some of this stuff feels. I have never been to the Holy Land. I know people who have. My parents have. It does feel like whatever you believe about the area, they sure want you to buy a souvenir. And there is a lot of traditional understanding or traditional. You go there and they say, well, this is where Jesus did that, and this is where Jesus did that, and this is where Jesus did that. And then you have maybe like multiple people claiming Jesus did the same thing, but in different places. So, this is a little bit of a murky topic, I think. And so, maybe starting with just the question of what does archaeology contribute to our understanding of our faith? Like how does it help? Maybe, Julie, would you mind making sure I think
Sally,
all are muted?
Yeah,
I thought he did a good job of explaining that it can never prove what we
Mhm.
believe in our faith, but it can verify place names, it can verify locations as well. And that's, well, I guess Israel's not that big that Jesus couldn't have walked around it, but
Right.
but that these are doable distances between these towns. And we were talking this morning about that. One of the things that I think he's done a good job, and I think the archaeology helps us, we tend to look at all of this in 20th and 21st century eyes. But when we look at it from the viewpoint of the people who lived
Mhm.
contemporary to Jesus, that so many of the things that are dubious in our eyes make complete sense because the phrasing and things like that would be different.
Mhm.
And even the toilets can tell you something about that place that as technology advances, if you see something that is anachronistic to that time period, then you start to go, hey, wait.
Right.
But when a lot of what they found as he was going through it was verification that these are not just places, but the funerals, the plots were contemporary to Jesus's time. What we know about first century funerals, what we know about first century burials, that shows that Nazareth did actually exist at that time.
Right.
So it can, I think sort of what he said is that it could possibly refute the place names and some of the facts in the New Testament, but it doesn't.
Mhm.
I think the other thing that I got out of it in that line is that Luke and John and Mark are valuable sources.
Yeah.
And what they're giving you is correct. And then he made certain to say that, well, it's correct that it exists, but I can't tell you what happened.
Mhm.
Particularly with Luke, because they were talking about how well put together Luke's writings were.
Yeah.
And that a lot of what they found verified what Luke was saying. It is,
Yeah.
it was interesting.
Yeah. You get maybe one of the things to think about there is, okay, so you have these things in Luke, and in the other gospels too, but we can focus on Luke if we want, where he's naming dates and places and people. And if you find, okay, those people did exist, they existed in that place, and they existed around that time as far as best we can tell, what does that tell us about what Luke is trying to do with the gospel that he's writing? That question made sense. Everyone's looking at me like that question doesn't make sense.
True story as he saw it and heard it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, maybe this has already been said, I came in late, I'm sorry. But the veracity of the other things that are in the account that aren't particularly archaeologically verifiable have more credibility because the things that are archaeologically provable
Mhm.
are held up. So,
Yeah.
they're not making this stuff up. It's
Right.
the conclusion one comes to.
Yeah, and there's an interesting strain that I've heard about over the years. Maybe you have too, like the mythicism, where there were in the 19th century. This is actually relatively common, where you had people saying, "You know what? I don't think Jesus ever existed. I think this is a made-up story." And they would go through and they would try and tie it to ancient mythology. And they would say, oh, this is just in the tradition of the dying and rising gods. Look, Osiris was God who died and then rose again, and that's just like Jesus. And there's like Apollonius of Tyana, like they're talking about these sorts of stories. And so the question that comes up and that they answered in the affirmative was like, is this the same as a mythological story? And so one of the things that I think is really helpful about these archaeological finds is that when someone is naming, so a gospel writer is naming people, places, things, times, and then we find those people in those places and those things in those times, it makes it seem like, okay, what's happening here isn't just one of those mythological stories, about just like, oh, okay, well, there were some gods and then they did this, at the Titans fought and then Zeus came from that. And then that's where the world came from. So, this is about, Luke is attempting to write history. Basically, that was the genre. So if everything is that precise, then this isn't a mythological story. This is an attempt at writing something historical. And so the claims are to be taken as if they happened. And so I think that's one of the things that I think archaeology is really helpful for, is in saying it's like, no, they should be understood as documents for someone trying to write history. And then you have to assess the claims and say, so that means someone is saying that these miracles did happen, that this person was, did die and rise from the dead. Okay, what do you make of that? You can't just wave your hand at it and call it myth. If we're talking about a person and places and things that we can find and excavate. Now, the toilets don't tell you that Jesus rose from the dead. Sorry. Go ahead.
And buy a souvenir.
And buy a souvenir. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that is one of the important bits about archaeology. It's like helping us understand that this is indeed trying to be historical.
I also think that this chapter did a good job of explaining some things. I'm going to mispronounce the name, but Quirinius.
Quirinius. Yeah,
okay,
we'll go with that.
That the time lapse that they feel that Herod and he did not rule at the same time,
Mhm.
but then to find out that there was a coin that showed that he did. And coins actually are a wealth of historical information. It's amazing how much they learn in coins. But that either they could be two people with the same name, or it could be the same person who fell out of favor, fell back in favor, and then became the ruler again. But so I thought that was kind of interesting. And actually, the part we both thought about the part about Bethlehem was very enlightening too, about the slaughter of the innocents. That when you think about it in the terms of Bethlehem being not what it is today, but what it was in the first century, the slaughter of every male child could have been 20 kids, which would be devastating to that community. But there again, like you said, I mean, if you look at Herod's record of killing friends, family, strangers, anybody who walked by, kind of surprising the three wise men got out alive. But,
Right.
It makes sense that children in a small town wouldn't be headline news.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of things that I thought he used archaeology to explain very well.
Well, the way we've always been taught, in Sunday school as a little kid, there were just thousands of kids.
Yeah.
That they slaughtered.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at the findings of Nazareth and Bethlehem being as small.
Yeah,
It's like a little farm town in Indiana. It's
right.
And then moving too, they said the boundaries that may have moved 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Or maybe where water was or something.
And you got to remember back then, there were no CNN, there were no Fox, there were no, so what had it locally may not be shared that wide.
Right.
So that why there may not be all the document referring to that because it was seen at a local event.
Yeah. There's the AP Newswire did not exist back then. So if you had this small village where yeah, maybe it's a couple dozen people, not thousands. Like, you know, we're maybe thinking Sunday school, because I think that was my,
Yeah.
mentality of this too. And then you're like, okay, so how many people can even tell the story? And then how often are those people getting out? You know, most people in most of human history have, like, until recently, but so like throughout most of human history, most humans didn't travel more than like 7 miles from where they were born. The idea that, people are not, getting to the, airport in Tel Aviv and then, flying to Rome and then, telling them about what just happened last week. I mean, the pace at which this story could actually move through, and then who's writing it down either. Is this the kind of event that's going to get chiseled into stone someplace?
And would Herod allow it?
Right, would Herod even allow it? Why you could even start thinking in terms of, like, if he's going to act that way because he's afraid for his kingdom, is he going to tell everybody, I am afraid for my kingdom? There is someone who is challenging my throne. Like, really? And I'm scared enough of that I'm going to go kill the babies. That doesn't necessarily convey strength. And so, that's just another reason why. Is anyone going to write that down? How many people even know the story? If they know the story, is it going to be a big deal? Because it's right. The concept of infant exposure was very common at that time.
We even kind of paralleled it to now, even if they had a news wire, let's just say,
Yep.
maybe it wasn't newsworthy, even though it sounds horrible to have
Sure.
that, okay. But like, think about, like, I live in Chicago. There are times there are shootings that I know about, and I'm trying to find information,
Yeah.
but because shootings happen in Chicago, you just can't find it. So, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
another one, it's just another one. So Herod, that's just what Herod does,
Yeah.
So I don't know if even it would be newsworthy if they did have a news wire, just
Yeah.
not enough to
Right.
stay in the time of airtime.
Yeah. No, it's a great point.
I'm wondering that in
That's right.
my time, when I was, 50 years ago, let's say, when you watch television and the news, did you get news from LA and New York?
No.
I don't think so. You
No.
got news from your area,
We still don't really.
no?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
You see them at the local
how
channels
many,
all the
how many
time.
people are following the fighting in the Congo right now?
Oh,
Particularly Africa, we get very little. out of Africa.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, that's what made the Sunday New York Times so special. Is that some people could get that outside of New York. But even that, like, the pace of news moved so slow. I mean, compared to today, it moved really slowly, and compared to 2,000 years ago, like, yeah.
What has not changed is, call it human nature or whatever, but is the politics. Mayor of Chicago just canned the aviation commissioner, who was told by her people that she was not on the canning list, and now that keeps going on all the time. And Herod, one, being sick, and two, trying to survive because the emperor in Rome was not pleased
Mhm.
with his lack of, I mean, we look at things in history as, oh, this is a factoid and it's a little bit. I mean, we just passed Valentine's Day.
Mhm.
Where does Valentine's Day come from? Everybody thinks, oh, it's hearts and lovey-dovey. Was it Quirinius? I could be wrong. Was a Roman emperor that needed men to fight for his war. And these young men were marrying women and, starting families and all. This was awful. I need fodder for my cannons. And so he passed a law that men couldn't marry. And so Valentine, before they became a saint or whatever,
Mhm.
I don't even know where he was in the hierarchy, was secretly marrying couples, and they were drifting off. And when Quirinius found out he was doing that, off with his head. So we talk about Valentine's Day and St. Valentine's. He was a guy that was trying to do right in his own world, and it cost him his head. And So that political situation was going on in Israel at that time. And what we're beginning to find out is, my goodness, some of the things in the scripture are validating who was in charge here and what happened here, not necessarily biblically, but the causes the children to be slaughtered or whatever. And you're getting a little bit of an insight politically that you won't get. I mean, I grew up in Chicago and we used to, sheriffs couldn't succeed themselves, or maybe it was 2 terms. There'd be a Democratic sheriff that would be in for 2 terms. Then there'd be a Republican sheriff that would be in for 2 terms. Then there'd be a Democratic. Was there a lot of difference between the sheriffs? Not really, because the sheriff's office was worth $1 million if you just laid off what the syndicate was making their most profitable entity on. One was drugs, one was prostitution. And so all the sheriffs went in there and they arrested bank robbers and people that abused their wives and all. But meanwhile, Manheim Row was still full of hookers. And so you look at that and say, that's not going to appear in the history books.
Right.
Even today to speak of, unless you really dug into it. But that was the life that you lived if you were affected by politics in Illinois in 1956. So, you know, I think what I'm seeing out of the archaeology is it's validating what the scripture is saying, and that therefore we should look more seriously at what is said. And that's just a foundation for the spiritual side, which is, it's what did Jesus say, not where was Jesus located.
It's not like Luke is saying, I'm going to put these facts in and I'm going to insert this fake stuff about it. You know,
Oh, right.
That doesn't.
Yeah, it'd be sure strange,
Right.
especially when he's like,
However, that would be what we call historical fiction today.
it is. Yep. And, you know, one of the other things that archaeology could do is help us find other manuscripts from, you know, whether it's the biblical tradition or other traditions, and say, was historical fiction something that they would write at the time? And as far as we can tell, we haven't found anything that seems to match the genre that we would call historical fiction today. But we are aware of that. And so that is what, you know, some people will say back. It's like, well, yeah, no,
There's no readership for historical fiction. Today, there's great readership. If you're a good author, if you're a good wordsmith, you write, oh, wow, maybe that could have sort of did happen there, but it's fictional. Back then, everything was oral. Everything was 7 miles from where you lived. And there were a few, educated people.
But everything being oral, though, also meant that the poets, singers, scouts, whatever you want to call them, they got fed, they got paid by praising people in power. So there are a lot of very lengthy stories throughout history, very lengthy poems attributing the greatness of a particular leader that are completely fictional. But because, in Middle English and in Scandinavian countries, there's like this whole tradition of talking about victories that the people weren't even at and things like that.
Yep.
But I don't disagree with your point, though, in that for the people that, for the slaves and the poor people and the rich people who were listening to the message, there's no reason to embellish it. The truth seemed to be more than sufficient to catch people's attention.
And the commitment to die for it
That's to me
is
one
not present in our society today.
that was further on as I remember the book. I haven't you read that part. That to me, one of the most compelling things is that not only were the apostles willing to die, but very, very gruesome deaths. And I don't know what fiction I would be willing to be boiled in oil for or something.
Yeah. It I guess, one of the things we're talking about, we could ask it to someone directly, like, so we know that archaeological evidence can help with some things, like if so-and-so said, Pontius Pilate was the ruler at this point in time. And then there's discovery that says Pontius Pilate, ruler over this area. It's like, okay, well, that's at least consistent. But it can't do everything. What are the limits of the archaeological evidence?
Well, I think archaeology can definitely be used to disprove things. And the fact that it hasn't yet disproved anything, there again, I think Rich's comment, the phrase veracity, I think is what kind of comes to mind, is that the more evidence that you find that, and like Mary said, the bulk of this is true, the facts of place names and people names, et cetera, and, timeframes, if all that's true, then that lends more credence to the truthfulness of the rest of it. Because archaeology, there are lots of examples of archaeology disproofs.
What would be an example of like a disproof?
Battle of the Little Bighorn. There used to be a theory that the Sioux won because they had repeating rifles and that they had, obviously greater numbers. But there was some 25 years ago a prairie fire.
Mm-hmm.
And once all the prairie grass was gone, they could go through with metal detectors and find not just where bullets were spent, where they landed, but they could also find evidence possibly of where they were fired from.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed that mostly the natives were using single shot muskets or else bows and arrows. That it wasn't high tech. It was just a leader who was too arrogant and too outnumbered to possibly walk away alive. So that's one.
No, yeah. There is, is one of the common things that's taken place, over, the past few hundred years is to say something like, Pontius Pilate is an example. There were people who said, well, we have found no evidence that he ever existed, therefore he didn't, or there's no evidence of a census ever being taken. And so this is made up. And that's a relatively common thing that we've seen people say. But that gets into, I don't remember, was this phrase in the book, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? I don't know if he used that exact phrase. But that is, I think that's kind of an important principle too, because in so many of these cases, if you come to a conclusion that because we haven't found archaeological evidence, therefore something didn't happen, that just because of you don't have the evidence doesn't mean it isn't there and won't be discovered eventually. There were, historians who said the Hittite civilization never existed. They're like how the Bible's talking all about this group, the Hittites. They're really just this made up group that, they were writing their version of historical fiction to talk about how great they were and they defeated the Hittites and everything. But that's all made up. It's like, and then they find the Hittite capital city in Turkey eventually. And it's like, they call themselves the Hittites and they're like, and our leader was this, and the city's name is Hatrusa or whatever. Like, yep, pretty much. And so, one of the things that is important is that we know what it can do. It can verify certain things. If you have, so, in your example, were there repeating rifles? Well, we don't find any to know. If we knew the battle took place here at a particular time, we can scan the area because the prairie grass has been burned. We can say like at least what we found. Now, I don't know. Someone could make a claim, oh, all the repeating rifles were taken away. Well, I don't know, maybe, but you'd expect to find out. But especially for something 2,000 years ago, where we don't know the geography or we don't have a map from that time, with like geo coordinates that would tell us go exactly here to find this place. just because the evidence hasn't been found doesn't mean that some future discovery won't eventually show us something that we didn't think existed before.
Look at the harbors.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, it was in store.
It's wrong. It wasn't as big as the Grecian. one.
Exactly.
And guess what? It was. It just sank.
Yeah.
Into the,
Yeah, that's a great example for the book.
Or the pool that they had to go 40 feet down.
Right. Yep.
to find the fifth portico.
Right. That tells you too, in both of those cases, even just how much the topography changes. It's so strange for us to think that like people living 2,000 years ago also might have been like 40 feet lower. Like everything I'm standing on right now is 4 stories higher than where they were, even though it's like the same spot. And if that happens, and we're trying to look for cities or places from 2,000 years ago, but they could be buried. I mean, they are buried. That's why you have to excavate it, but they could be like really buried.
But they're also in a desert type situation where the wind blows.
Yep.
And it get,
Change
like
all the time.
Michigan's boundary has changed over the
Yep.
years. But, this land since the glacier is a lot more stable than anything in the Mideast.
Yeah.
It's easy to, build up and up and up. And,
Right. It emphasizes more how you have to know the nature of the place you're looking at.
Now, I brought pictures from 1938, University of Chicago, the Oriental Institute, which now has a new name. And it was Armageddon, the first archaeological digs there, where you could see all these different layers, like you were saying. Man,
Mhm.
that was a civilization. It was people had a home here and they lived. And then there's another layer. That's another, it was incredible when you see the layers that they were covering. And that was 1938. Or they've discovered since. And like you were saying, 50 years, 100 years ago, a prairie fire wouldn't have shown anything. But technology now with metal detectors shows something new. So as time goes on, we're actually going further, we are able to go further back in time, which is really mind-boggling when you think about it.
Anybody ever been to Seattle?
Yeah.
Ever been to underground Seattle?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a whole
Other Seattle.
underneath Seattle.
Really?
Well, we sort of have that here
We do too, yeah.
Lower Michigan, lower
Oh, yeah,
Wacker.
but if you
I
know the
mean, that-
tunnels to Chicago, you don't ever have to go outside.
There
You're
there are
downtown.
parts of Chicago, Bridgeport and then maybe like in Lakeview area, where the original streets were quite a bit lower, and the houses all have that lower level, which was actually street level back 100 years ago.
There again, even, like I said, downtown.
Yeah.
Not many people go down to Lower Michigan, but that used to just be Michigan Avenue.
Right.
Right.
And, and that, like I said,
After the fire.
that's where the entrances were. Yeah.
Just it's sort of a human phenomenon, a fairly consistent human phenomenon that you hear about excavations in Rome and ancient Greece, and they're going down many, maybe dozens of feet, maybe even hundreds of feet, and finding layers, things getting built on top of things. So
Yeah.
I want to say Jericho. The excavations at Jericho have several layers. And they had to go down several, there again, as support of the Old Testament, they had to go down several layers before they found actually evidence of a destruction.
I was at Jericho and the topography there is like a hill like this. So that was the Palestinian area. And I thought, wait, this wall is over here. This is hill. It wasn't on a flat plain. It was on a hill. And if you're walking around it, since the walls, here's the wall and here's the hill. And if you walk around it enough, I can see where, the miracle, it's a miracle, but how the wall could have fallen out. Don't get me started on rehab though. Man, that's another story.
But they do have a German scientist analyze the walls and say it definitely came out.
Yes, and I can see why when you're there.
And, you know, these are, I think it shows that, we owe some gratitude to the people who do the really boring work of going out there and brushing things and shoveling things. You know, these things that seem like, you know, they take such a long time. It's like, what are you even doing when there's, you know, there's tons of other things you could be doing. You could be, you know, feeding the hungry or whatever at this time, and you're digging down. It's like, well, both of those things are important. And the, you know, having access to what was happening historically also helps us understand just how far away we are from this time period. And, you know, like we were talking about with Bethlehem before, the, you know, Sunday school version making us imagine that it's like 20,000 people. It's like, it might have been a relatively small event. Like understanding the Bible requires us to, the text is not written in a contemporary American context. We can't just look at it and then whatever those words would mean, like whatever images those words would conjure up in our head, say like, well, that's exactly what would have happened. We've talked about some of it here. We don't know the geography or the topography off the top of our heads. We don't know anything about cities with changing boundaries, but without a zoning board. Like we are not, we're not aware of how like information traveled around then. And so it's hard work to really get in there and understand what was happening at the time, and then how do we apply that to what we're reading in the Bible. And that's just a meta comment. That's what I think is so great about groups like this, and why it requires actual study, and availing ourselves of what scholars have worked on, because it really can illuminate for us and help us describe both to ourselves and then to other people a bit more of like what's actually happening, and what it means.
But we bring our own prejudice
Of course we do.
to viewing that. Your comment about all those people brushing the dust off. Excuse my cynicism on that. There are a whole lot of graduate students wanting that professor to sign off on their thesis. And that's why they're there, and that's why it's 130 degrees and the sweat's pouring down. They're back because they have a goal to be get a doctorate in archaeology.
Sure.
And so that's what makes it work. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but you look at how it comes. It's not dedicated people trying to find that last piece of papyrus. It's somebody got a grant from somebody to go here, and he brings his crew and they do it. And I look at that and say, God bless them all.
Such cynicism.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking sort of in a similar line, but not as cynical.
I was thinking about all the people that study the universe. The astronomers.
Right.
In a practical sense, who cares? Right? But I'm glad that we have people that are trying to see beyond the edge of the universe, try to figure out how far does this thing go. And at the same time, they're driven by there's some kind of drive there, right? It's not just, maybe there's some that are just after a degree in a cushy teaching post at some liberal arts college. But I think there's the people who are like, this is a treasure hunt.
Oh, I think
It's like, this is a treasure hunt. I'm going to find,
And I think it's the same thing with.
I'm going to find the thing, right? And maybe that wears off after a while, but the quest, I think, is part of the human nature, right?
worse than my spear in the windmill. I think that it's just that everybody is different, and I'm only, trying to get on the edge and say, oh, and you can all disagree with me, but the point is, that's what makes the science or the world go around. It's people for different reasons doing things in archaeology that give us the results and all. And you know, I probably have that mindset. I love the Big Bang people that said, well, that's it. That, you know, God didn't create the universe, the Big Bang did.
It's
And
silly if they ever heard.
we put up the Hubble and the Hubble saw the Big Bang. And then what's the new one that they put up? The
Well,
Webb.
Yeah, the web.
They put the Webb up and the Webb goes, hey, guys, there's beyond the Big Bang. There's more universe out there. So I sit back in my little Hubble and say, God created the universe and God hung the stars, if you will, and all. And it's being validated by the Weber, you know, when all of these people thought, and they were thinking mathematically, logically, astronomically, that that was it. And so I just look and think, we have God's creation and we'll always be finding out things about it. And, you know, I think that we need to do that. Why do we go to the moon and why do we want to go to Mars? You know, it's the same drive.
And what you're saying, you know, there was somebody that figured out the copper ore, I can melt that and I can make a weapon. Wow, isn't that something? But somebody else said, hey, you know, add some tin to that and make bronze and we can cut through that copper. But then there's another guy that said, hey, let's melt this metal and make iron. We can then go right through the bronze. So it's this, humankind seems to have this where we always want to learn more, experiment more, and find out more.
Well, have more weapons.
Well, yes.
Well, there's always a fine line between weapons and tools.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, right.
like the idea that you can't take a pocket knife onto the airplane, to me, I understand it, but it's kind of weird because I grew up, everybody carried a pocket knife because it was a useful tool, you know, and now it's a life-threatening device now to have a Swiss Army knife in your pocket.
I lost mine 2 weeks ago at an airport, PSA.
I mean, nuclear fission can make a devastating bomb and it
Yeah.
can also be very clean, highly scalable power
It's
for,
what's giving us our electricity as we
we
speak.
still have that. Yep.
I came to a Bible study here the first time, kicking and screaming. My wife says, you know the Quran better than the Bible.
Yeah.
So I come there the first day. This guy's opening up this bag and he's got his knife. I pulled out mine. I put mine, there's mine. And then a bunch of guys pulled out. And I said, this is my Bible
We all
study.
have knives.
That used to be, a guy carried that, because you don't know,
You never know.
you never know.
Now they all have guns.
So, okay, let's take this, pull a couple of things together. So I'd like the, James Webb telescope thing and the whole, like, we had the, for a while there was the steady state theory of the universe. And then we said, no, cosmic background radiation, it's this Big Bang theory of the universe where everything came from one point. And now we're kind of like, let's not say it too loud, but like, we actually don't know anymore because there's problems with Big Bang cosmology and whatever. Okay, so our model keeps on updating. So you've got a bunch of people out there right now who are saying that the Exodus never happened. Because if there was, a group of Israelites walking through the desert, wouldn't we find some archaeological remains of those people? And it's very thin. Okay. How would we handle that?
I would think that the fact that they were transient would mean that they wouldn't be in any one spot long enough to leave a midden pile behind, or to have even built like a temporary altar or anything like that.
Mhm.
Plus, food was being supplied for them, so they wouldn't have had to have campfires. They wouldn't have had to, there's so many things as you read the story of the Bible that would mean that they wouldn't need to leave any archaeological evidence because of it.
Clothes and shoes that never wore out.
Clothes and shoes, well, depending on what they're made of. And there again, it's amazing to me how a shoe from an Iceman in Austria can last 3,000 years in the ice, but then the same shoe 5 miles away, where possibly the rest of his population was, there aren't any shoes. That, it's amazing the conditions that will make something survive versus destroy it.
Well, that's it. A lot of the materials, people use at ancient times degrade very quickly. And if you had those conditions like the Alps where you had frozen things, they tend to disappear, degraded, vanished.
We can also think about, as we mentioned before, the environment that they were in, the desert environment. You know, stuff is blowing all the time. We were talking before about these archaeological layers. Like, just how far down exactly have you gone across the Sinai Desert to find these things? And then, yeah, right, that everything was on, everything had to be light enough to carry. Some of this stuff, you know, in that environment is going to get beat up a lot more.
Tabernacle was a portable
And-
for that.
Yeah.
Exactly, right.
And, you know, we tend to look at everything as discardable.
They did.
You would think if you are traveling through the desert and the strap on your sandal breaks, you might say, well, I don't have a sandal anymore, but I can cut that then into strips to make something else useful out of it. You know, they're going to repurpose it
Mhm.
because there's no Walmart for them to go to.
They never found any plastic bags, right?
You can always say,
Yeah. They were found any boxes with the Amazon smile.
you can always tell, look at these other things that everybody said never could be.
Yeah.
And they are,
Yes.
you know, and that where one helpful thing that we could get out of this is somebody argues that, said, just wait.
I think that's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's like Pontius Pilate never existed. Okay, wait, we have this inscription that shows up. The
Right,
porticos were never there until they were.
right.
Nazareth didn't exist until it did.
Right.
It reminds me, did everyone see that movie Men in Black? Long time ago, like late 90s?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was that quote, Tommy Lee Jones had that quote. He's talking to Will Smith after he just realized aliens are real. And he's like, you know, 1,500 years ago, everyone knew the earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everyone knew the earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew we were alone in the universe.
Yeah.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. And, you know, it's a similar kind of thing here. Like, we all knew that there was no evidence for the Hittite civilization or for all of these things. It's like, that's the very smart people could tell you that we knew that the earth, you know, was, well, 100 years ago was eternal, and 50 years ago started from one big explosion. And now, well, we don't know. We're figuring it out. But we're always on, our current model is changing. And so any claims based on like, well, the Bible is not true because the Exodus never happened because there's no archaeological evidence for it. It's like, just wait.
I thought it was
Subtle science.
I would just like to throw in that King Tut's tomb was opened on this day in 1923, and what a wealth of
Yeah,
information that's applied.
right. It's an incredible discovery.
Yeah.
These things can change everything.
I like what he said in the book here. He says, archaeology is just a study of durable rubbish.
Yep. Yep.
And the new discoveries, Götepe in Turkey are changing. Instead of 3,000 years or 30,000 years ago, we were here. Now it's 130,000 years ago that
Right.
civilization. I mean, it's like practically every minute something is changing.
Yeah.
At a very fast rate.
I thought it was interesting that every instance of somebody casting doubt, it was an atheist who was basically saying, well, yeah.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's sort of an agenda there, I think.
Yeah, 100%. You know, people will, based on their prior presuppositions, they will be more convinced, in particular by the arguments from Silas. Like, it's, you know, if I'm predisposed not to believe, and then somebody tells me there's no archaeological evidence for the Exodus, and be like, well, yeah, of course. And see that helps confirm my prior beliefs. Would have been the same group of people who believed that Nazareth didn't exist.
Hey, who's gonna write about the Exodus? You know, I mean, everything has to be positive for the Pharaoh. You're not gonna, you're not gonna say something, you know, you got out. You're gonna not, they ain't gonna say nothing about that.
Well,
That's for
and,
sure.
and actually archaeologically, it's possible something could have been written, but, as pharaohs fell in and out of favor, it wasn't uncommon to literally scrape the writing off of the wall.
Yeah.
Or I'll put another stele in front of it or around it. So there may be evidence that there again, we don't know yet. So
I think I read someplace where they've discovered Egyptian writing about the presence of a whole bunch of Hebrews in Egypt. I think they've some writing referring to that, not particularly the Exodus, but back to a whole bunch of them.
Well, they had to be there to be slaves.
Yeah. But, and that just goes to show, I'm not sure what your, what document or painting or whatever you're referring to, but like one discovery can change the whole narrative on that. You find just one thing in one cave, one piece of papyrus. I don't remember if the book talked about it, but the stone tablet we found that referred to the house of David in Judah, was like, it was an inscription that then proved that the dynasty of David existed. And of course, predictably, until that stone was found, were there people who said David never existed?
Right.
Of course there were. And so, it keeps on happening where we should have a posture of humility about what we know and what we don't know, and a posture of skepticism when they say based on the absence of evidence, therefore such and such thing never existed, such and such person never lived, such and such thing never happened. And that seems very common within skepticism, that the absence of evidence is being projected as evidence of absence. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can take away from this particular chapter, is just how often the model has had to change based on future discoveries, just like scientifically that's had to happen too.
And you're assuming that there's honesty on both sides, that the one who's skeptical says, you can't prove it because we can't find this out, and that he's not making stuff up or, creating a bad tablet that furthers him. But if you put that above, it would be great if we could all be intellectually honest into a spiritual warfare of God on one side and Lucifer on the other. And if you don't think that some of those people who are, whatever you want to call them, weak, lazy, not wanting to look logically at something, and they become, like Wormwood in C.S. Lewis's book, just the minor devils. He's going to project that. And so we're sitting here saying, yeah, we'll be honest, but we believe this. And because we believe this, we're going to look at history through this prism. And I think we're winning, versus the other side. But that's just me.
Always here for the cynical word, Bill. But important, because we should also have some skepticism of archaeological discoveries. When people say, I have found X, Y, Z, we have found Jesus' birthplace. There's a fair amount of relics, that are claimed. I think if you were to add up, If you were to add up the number of souvenirs being sold that are wood from the cross of Jesus, you could probably build this whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so just because somebody claims they found X, Y, or Z, we should be skeptical of those things too. Because they're people motivated on both sides.
There was a discovery not too long ago of an osseous, box, a stone box that was just meant to hold bone. And everybody was saying, oh, this is proof that James, the brother of Jesus, existed because it had the word James on it. But then as they were able to clean it up, they found out that it was James, but it was different. It wasn't meant to be the brother of Jesus.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and I think God gives us a desire to be curious, to understand this. And
I lived in Peru 1,000 years ago, and Pizarro's bones were in 5 different cathedrals. You could come and see Pizarro's bones. Now, I have no idea if any of them were real or whatever, but I just looked at that and thought there were people that had a reason for wanting to get people to come. And it was souvenirs to a certain extent, because that's who came to see Pizarro's bones.
And you had mentioned prison, and that I had brought a picture from the University of Chicago of a Gerfom that mentioned Hezekiah. I was in Israel. I took a picture of part of the wall that the archaeologists had uncovered, which was part of Hezekiah's wall. And
We had that picture here last week.
yeah. And it's not a magnificent thing, I can assure you. One factoid, we went to the tomb of the so-called tomb of Jesus. And what most people don't look up. I looked up. There's a bus depot right above. That's where all the buses, tourist buses park.
Yep. Convenient.
And they use all the pieces of land.
And yet we have, this is a little adjacent to archaeology, but there are questions about something, you can get into long discussions about like the Shroud of Turin, for instance, that, many people believe is the burial cloth of Jesus, and, many other people think not. And like, so just because we have a thing and someone makes a claim that the thing is something doesn't mean that we should automatically believe it. After all, they could sell souvenirs better if there's a bus depot.
Well, I think it's a fair proposition to say that when we look at archaeological things and we question them and occasionally say that's not valid, or it's not real, or it's not what you say it is. It proves to people that we're trying to learn the truth, that we're about the truth. We're not about, deception or falsehoods. So I think it's a good thing for us to question, to be skeptical and to demand solid science, solid research, solid validation that something is what we hope or claim it is.
Yeah.
So,
No, 100%. Like if someone said, I found a stone tablet that says, King David existed, or like another one today. And we're like, eventually it comes out, no, never mind, that tablet was a forgery. Well, that doesn't mean King David didn't exist. That just means that tablet wasn't authentic.
Right.
Like we don't need to cling to every single purported discovery as if the fate hangs or falls on the authenticity of a piece of stone that we discover. And so I think we can have that appropriately skeptical posture. And I think that's the right thing to do, because for the reasons you described.
yeah, I got this as a Christmas present some years ago, the Archaeological Study Bible. A lot of
Well, that's kind of cool.
juicy material in here.
I was 20 years old.
Yeah, so I know I'm coming in way late in this, but my overall question is always, this is interesting, but so what? To my archaeology can't prove that Jesus is the Son of God. It might prove that, right? That he lived. And my faith isn't founded on archaeology. It's interesting, it's nice, but so what? I don't mean that in a harsh way. I just mean it like, why do we need to know this?
Well, we were talking about this a little bit earlier today with, so we're asking people, here's how I would synthesize it, June. It's like, we're asking people to take the gospel accounts, let's focus on that for today, as authentic descriptions of who this real person Jesus was and what he said and what that means for us today. And we can support, and like when we're talking to somebody about it, whether it's ourselves or someone else, the fact that we can say there are reasons to believe that this is a historically reliable document because we have found, these things to support the details that are within the account that says it's a history that enhances the credibility of what we're trying to get ourselves or others to take seriously. But at the same time, we also say what we just said, which is the faith doesn't hang on that. Just because there isn't archaeology doesn't mean it's not true. So it's on the, I think it helps support the idea that these are historical and therefore should be taken seriously. But that's probably as far as it goes.
Well, there are going to be some skeptics, people that we know that are maybe trying to help find their faith, that might be more encouraged if we can show them these evidences.
Yeah, I think it's almost sort of a form of apologetics. Because, an example I just thought of was Jesus' crucifixion. I know there's a school of thought that that story is made up because that's not how Romans crucified people. Generally speaking, they were tied to the cross and just left to the elements. That they never nailed people, and if you nailed somebody in their hand, their skin would tear and they'd fall off. Archaeological evidence has shown that there are rare occasions, and this would mean that somebody was particularly heinous in the Romans' eyes, that they did actually nail people, that they found actually skeletons with nails in them. And also, if you look at the archaeological evidence of medical documents at the from the first century, the wrist was part of the hand. It didn't become separated medically for several centuries after that. So nailing in the wrist, which is what the general assumption is, would work. And there again, they found evidence of bones that showed either the nail marks or actually literally nails that they couldn't pull out to verify that. So there again, it doesn't prove that Jesus was resurrected,
right,
but it proves that that part of the story is, and the more parts of the story that are true, the easier it is to feel intellectually comfortable with the parts that aren't yet true.
Quoting from here, it said, Luke has been established to be a scrupulously accurate historian, even in the smallest details. One prominent archaeologist carefully examined Luke's references to 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands, finding not a single mistake. And he goes on to say that, and then regarding Jesus, he said, Luke says the resurrection was firmly established by many convincing proofs, quoted Acts 1:3. So you know, just extrapolate based on all the things he said that were absolutely nail on correct, and he goes on to say, hey, there's all kinds of proofs that Jesus rose again and walked among us. So
as you were chatting, it reminded me, maybe we could close with this of 2 Peter 1:16. It says, for we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. This is not a cleverly devised myth, you know, when we can point to all of the historical details of it, or at least it supports the historicity of it. So with that, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the conversation today. We thank you for the gathering of your people, both in study and then in worship. May you be with us, and may we worship you in the spirit and in truth. In Jesus' name, amen.